Thank you so much for joining us. We just about have a full house. Our seminar today is about barn finds, what we all dream of. Who in the crowd would not love to stumble into a situation, find their dream car? Is it an AC Bristol? Is it a Superbird? Is it a Duesenberg that no one knows about? Well, these are the guys. And today we have Brad Phillips of Hagerty leading the seminar. And Brad has been playing with cars since he was in diapers. Isn't that true? For all I know, he may still be, but we don't ask those questions. Brad has such a diverse taste in cars. He has a Willys from the teens. He has a 308. I mean, you can't get much different than an early Willys. So, to that. And he's had all sorts of things. So he's going to lead us and take it away, Brad, and introduce our crew.
All right. Thank you, Jonathan. And we all appreciate your work to help pull this panel together. This is really going to be a lot of fun. We've had a ton of fun talking about this and kind of strategizing on what cars we want to talk about with these guys. And you guys are really going to get a kick out of this. I have the esteemed pleasure of introducing these folks. We'll start from the far my left, Tom Cotter. Now, Tom has a web series of Barn Hunter that he's doing with Hagerty, but everyone knows him from far beyond that. Who doesn't have a copy of Cobra in the Barn somewhere in their house, right? It's just always there. It's the easy one to pick up, and that really started it all for him. A whole series of those, and now you've got a brand new book, Motor City Barn Finds. Holding it up, and yeah, he's going to be signing those outside also after the seminar. So, Tom, thank you so much for coming. And I will have to plug, this is also a major Cobra guy, if you didn't know that already. And he let me drive his AC Cobra 289 yesterday on the road tour for the Concours, and I am your eternal.
Well, I couldn't get anything else to drive it, so you
Yeah, then he came out and my hands were locked to the steering wheel, so it was fun. Next, we have Gord Duff, who is currently the global head of auctions for RM Sotheby's. Gord's been around the scene a lot, kind of born and raised in the auction business, really, in Canada, and a serious car guy in his own right with a GT350 that we were just talking earlier today about when he debates on whether to drive it to meetings or not, based on the temperature, or if he's got to make a phone call, or he's just out there having fun. So, Gord, thanks very much for coming with us and lending your story. Next, we have Tom Shaughnessy. Now, Tom is a kind of a reformed aerospace engineer with a degree from Pratt, which is a really big deal if you're a smart guy, and Tom is a really smart guy. I also learned today he's a private pilot, in addition to the fact that he's been hunting Ferraris and Ferrari parts and GT40s and all kinds of really cool stuff for years and years. Tom's really been on the scene for a long time and just has a wealth of things to share with us, and it's going to be really, really entertaining. Next, we have Wayne Carini. If you've been in a bunker for the past 6 years or so, you may not have heard of him, but Wayne started off hunting cars with his dad. I mean, years and years ago. So he's been doing this ever since he was a kid. You can see a photo there with his dad. This year, I think he said it was a very early Model T wheels on Model A. And just, this is what he grew up in. This was the family business, and it's moved on to where Chasing Classic Cars, I think, is the most popular show of its kind. And we always love having Wayne around because he's just the most authentic person in the world, and he's going to share a lot of really great stories with us today. So thank you very much to the panel. The idea behind this is that these folks are going to talk, they're going to lead in, we've got some slides with the cars, they're going to talk about how they got to the point of finding that particular car, what stirred their soul about it in particular, and maybe even what happened to it after the fact. So with that, we'll move on here, and we will see, I believe Tom Shaughnessy is kicking us off with the story of the 66 Ford GT40. Thank you, Tom.
Good morning. Good morning. So the GT40 that was up in Thousand Oaks is an interesting story. It was a Christmas day that I had finished Christmas with my family, and I got bored as always, which happens very quickly. And I knew I was selling my other GT40 because it was a halfway car. It was halfway between being, it was a usable tool, but it really needed a restoration. And I just decided to let someone use it for the races, which I think it went to England and eventually possibly going to be used at Goodwood. And then I was looking for the next GT40 because if I was going to have a great GT40, I might as well build it from the ground up. So there was no real way to find this. There was no one that tipped me off on this particular car. I just opened the Shelby registry, and it's pretty simple. I just wrote all the numbers down on a piece of paper. And I crossed out the ones that would not become available, the ones in the Miller Museum, all Mark IVs with very controlled hands. There were some that were destroyed. And basically, there were just about a dozen cars that were left that were still with privateers. Smaller guys that had one or two cars. And I just got out my cell phone and Googled people's names and just wrote some letters. And I sat there and wrote 7 handwritten letters. And weeks later, I had 2 phone calls out of 7. So none of the letters came returned. And this gentleman, Dennis Murdoch, who had had the car, and I knew it was up there, had the car since '77, who was never going to sell it. Well, his wife had come down with cancer. She's better now. And they wanted to buy their oldest son a house. And he invited me up there. And this thing was buried under, as you can see.
Yeah.
And I basically only pulled the car out of the garage only the first half because I had had enough data from other GT40 guys to tell me how really good the content of this car was. Most GT40s were driven hard, put away wet. This particular one was really only raced privately for and in club events, only for a brief amount of time. So the content was really good, and then the negotiations started. But there was no real secret to how I found it, except just good hard work. Open up the Shelby registry and write the good old letters, put the stamps on it. Because the older crowd, who all don't have an email address and all may not open their emails, they don't mind getting a little letter every once in a while. So it just happened to be the thing that did for me that day.
How is it for you? You're finding a car like this, you realize you've got it, it's right there. Do you get nervous all of a sudden? Oh boy. Well, did you tell anybody else?
Well, I don't tell anyone else, but it got in a big bidding contest because people knew it. In 3 weeks, that was not a free car. Let's just say that wasn't free, and let's just say the upswing of the car was $600,000 at the end. Wow. But the other car that was selling, I knew would cover that. So there was some bragging rights to pull something like that out. So.
Well, it was an amazing story. A lot of us watched it sort of unfold via the web. You know, as it's coming out, and talking about it now, sort of leaking out little bits of information about it. It was really fascinating, I thought, to kind of follow the stories that came out when you were able to start talking about it. So
it was fun. Dennis wasn't happy that those pictures. His wife was appalled that those pictures hit the press. But I just thought it was so cool.
Yeah. Can you see the car there at all? What color?
Let's just say my opening bid was just sub $2 million looking at the car like that.
Tom was talking about letters, and it's so important not to give away a lot of our secrets, but instead of a phone call, instead of an email, a letter is really the more personal way of approaching a person about buying a car. Because that letter, sometimes they'll put it on the refrigerator, it'll sit next to the telephone, it sits on the breakfast table, and it may be 6 months or a year or 2 years. But one of these days, hopefully they'll return the letter or phone call. It really pays off, a handwritten letter.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that worked out for me years ago is I used to make coffee mugs up because I deal with really pretty poor quality Ferraris at times. And I had my coffee mug that said, spun, flooded, burned, even hand grenaded, I don't care. The small print was nice cars also considered. And some woman came up to me 1 year, 5 years later, she goes, your coffee mug's still in our coffee thing. You know what? They'll throw away your business card. They won't throw away your coffee mug.
next we're going to go to Gord for the 57 Porsche. I have to say this one was very near and dear to my heart and really showed kind of the synergy of different people in the car hobby on getting this done. I actually had a tip about this exact car from my brother, who's not related to cars at all. It was a friend of his family that actually owned this, and I got a call that said, my family has this car, we're not really sure what to do. That turned into talking to Tom about it, and then Gord was involved in this. So I'll flip this to Tom first, and then we'll go to Gord on this particular car.
Well, this car was in Dallas, and I got a call from Brad, and he said, you know, I think there's a Speedster that could be available. It's been in the garage for a long time. Well, I flew down to Dallas, and we actually did a Hagerty Barn and Hunter episode down there, if you remember. And I met this woman whose husband bought this car before they were married. She lived in Mexico, he lived in Texas, and he proposed to her, you know, it was really, I mean, she showed me her wedding dress, her gown. I mean, her fiance at the time had an orange pen that he matched the pen. He painted his car the same color as the pen. This is an amazing story. The lady sat there just crying that her husband had died of ALS probably 20 years earlier, but the car had not moved out of the garage for 40 years. And she had no money. She had no money, no source of income. She couldn't afford a car. And so I went down there and met her, and really fell in love with her and the story. And then we got a hold of Gord and decided to make this like a Cinderella story, like a happy ending, and I'll hand it over to you.
So we ended up getting a phone call about this Porsche, and you had already done your video on it, so that was kind of the first thing that I took a look at, and I said, you know, absolutely, it's definitely something we want. They had offers from some different individuals that were very low, and we figured that we knew that we could get them a lot more money than what they were getting offered for the car. And as Tom said, they had absolutely no money, so we actually paid to fly the wife's son down to meet the truck. We had reliable carriers come pick up the car, bring it up to our facility in Auburn, Indiana. We made the decision to get the car running. So we spent some money on it. We told them that, you know, this will help the value of the car. We'll pay these costs. We can deduct from proceeds. So literally out of their pocket, they had to spend nothing. We brought the car up to Auburn. The bumpers were actually off the ar. There was a lot of boxes that came with it. So we hung the bumpers back on it. There was a lot of trim with the car. We got the car up and running. And I believe we had an auction estimate. We were offering it without reserve, and we had an auction estimate of, I think it was 150 to 200,000. And, you know, the offers that they had been given before the car was given to us was around 50 and 60,000. The car goes to auction, and it actually brings $340,000. Yeah. So the son and the wife were there, and they were absolutely crying when the car came across the block. We ended up having about, I want to say 6 or 7 telephone bidders on the car. So it just drew huge interest, the photos, the story. I mean, this is something that we sell. We offer about 750 cars a year, and a story like this comes up, you know, hardly ever. There's a handful of times. So it was, you know, special for us. It was special for them, and it was great that, you know, they literally won the lottery with us selling this car for them. So, you know, it was a happy ending for all.
It sold at Hershey at the auction, and I felt very privileged to have Nellie Fleming, the woman who owned the car, sit next to her, and she was crying, and she couldn't look at the screen. She just had her head buried in me, and she just, every time there was another bid, you know, 250, 275, whatever, and she'd shake more and more. It was really amazing. And at the end, 325 or 340, whatever it sold for, she looked up and she said, "He's still taking care of me." You know, you can't make that stuff up. And I, you know, people ask me about these cars, and I continue to say, you know, cars are just a catalyst for human interest stories. All these books I write and the videos, it's really about the human beings, and the cars just have a great way of bringing interesting people together. This was the best.
Yeah, that was really fantastic, the way it all worked out for everybody. Just absolutely stunning. And it still continues on. You've continued to do other things for him. You showed me a picture. You got them with Jay Leno, I think, right?
Yeah, so Leno was, going to go to Dallas, and she said, you know, I've watched him every night. Can you get me in there? So I got her behind the stage after the show and with Leno, and I got a picture on my phone. I just showed him this morning. And now her son yesterday, Jose Fleming, her son sent me a story that he wants to write about his parents and the car. He said, I have never written before, but would you take a look at my writing? So I said, well, this week I'll read it. So it's continuing, yeah.
Family now. Yeah, it's great. We'll move on to the next slide, Mr. Shaughnessy. We've got a couple of different cars to talk about there, and another example of something you were able to see and pursue that others didn't.
So what would you like me to start with? The Ghia convertible, the Cabriolet, came out of Michigan up here. It was a phone call to me, and I had heard years ago, of a motor that was in Wisconsin on a Ghia car that was destroyed, and a good garage picker up here found the car and wound up calling Peter Sweeney on the East Coast. And, it has Chevy in it, had a Ford rear end in it, it was a mess. And that car will be at Pebble Beach this year. We just got the car back from the upholstery shop, and the motor goes in it actually today. So it took 5 years, and I think a year to get it in the queue to get the work started. But basically, I kind of knew what it was. I mean, I knew what it was, but it was, it had no powertrain, and I wound up realizing where the powertrain was and wound up paying more for the powertrain than I did for the car, and the car still was $150,000. And the reason I get the phone calls from my competitors or my friends is because we reward them, and Peter was given $50,000 commission for tipping me off on that particular one. And if you tip people off and you share the wealth, or you share your successes, they call you again. So that was that particular car. And then the 340 America Spider, it was bought on eBay. I saw it on eBay, and I was tipped off by a Ferrari mechanic on it. And it was under a Devon body. There was only one Ferrari badge on it. But I realized as soon as the body came off what kind of chassis it could be. I didn't realize it was a competition car. I could tell by the brakes and some of the configuration, and that car's at the Ferrari factory right now, being restored. I no longer own that car because there was a controversy over it was an open or a closed car. And it was just a tip. And the tip, when we realized it was a competition car, the man who asked for a commission, he was just given double. Because this way I never had to hear from him again. And even though he's my friend, we just overpaid him, or I overpaid him, and I eventually wound up finding the motor to that car. It took 5 years to get that motor out of Chicago. And I was getting the motors for those two particular cars were actually harder than getting the two cars. But those are labors of love, and one will be finished. They both will be finished, both with their original powertrains, and that's, in old Ferrari world, that's about as good as it gets.
Sure.
We were out at Eric Zausner's for his pig roast, and you pulled in with the Ghia on the back of your trailer with the engine in the back of your pickup truck. But remember taking the sign out of the car, that it was for sale at one time?
The sign was a little sign that said, it was on a lunch plate or something, and that will be part of my Pebble Beach presentation to the judges, and it was for sale at a garage sale for $600. So.
Why do these cars have their engines and separated from?
Well, it's really easy with the Ferraris, especially the big block Ferraris, the Lampredi Ferraris, is that they were so. A Lampredi Ferrari is very similar to an aircraft engine where the liner screws into the cylinder head. And a Lampredi Ferrari engine takes about 300 hours to rebuild right now, and there's only, I would say, 5 or 6 guys in the country that are really qualified to do it, even though there's probably 50 that think they are. And it was really easy to put a Chevy in it and get instant power. So rather than fix this old distressed engine that had broken so many times, being fixed by garage mechanics, people just put Chevys in them. It was very common. And there's a book, the Bowtie book, which is a book basically of all the Ferraris that had American powertrains installed in them. But then finding where the motors went, because the motors didn't tend to get discarded, even if it was a hole in a block or something like that. They made a pretty damn good doorstop, so the motors usually are somewhere out there.
Sure. Oh, that's fascinating. Our next slide here for Wayne, the 21 Stutz Bearcat. I think we've seen that one. We saw that one running around. You'd had some fun with that. Can you tell us the story of your Bearcat?
So I get a phone call one day from this gentleman that says, I found a Stutz Bearcat in a barn down in Georgia. And so normally when you get a phone call like that, you figure it's got to be a Volkswagen kit car. The guy says, oh, it's a Stutz Bearcat. How can you tell? Well, it says Stutz right on the emblem. So I said, do you have any pictures of the car? He says, no, but he says, I was out hunting and I stopped by this big plantation to ask permission to go hunting on the property. And I got nosy and I looked in the barn, and he says, I asked the guy what the car was, and he showed me and said it was a Stutz Bearcat. He said he'd like to sell it. So this guy is now 8 hours away from the Stutz. I said, listen, I'm going to make it really worth your while. Go take pictures of this car. So about 3 weeks later, after multiple phone calls, he sent me pictures of the car, and it was a Stutz Bearcat. I couldn't believe it. I said, could I come down tomorrow? And he said, well, let me line it up. The guy that owns the car drives around in his golf cart with a shotgun. He says, so let me break the ice for you. Okay. So we go down. It's a couple days later. I asked if I could bring the film crew, so we go down. We drive down this road. It's about 2 miles into the forest with all the ivy coming down off the trees, and we feel we're going back into Deliverance, It's, hopefully it's okay. But the one thing I make sure I do when I go buy a car is I always stop and buy donuts or a coffee cake as a peace offering before you arrive. And so we got there, met the gentleman, we went into his house, we ate the coffee cake and had some coffee. Didn't say a word about the car, and after about a half an hour he said, oh, don't you want to see the car? And I'm dying to see the car. We opened the garage, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was just an unbelievable sight. I mean, just one of those things that you live for, to see this car. And it was the greatest story. The guy was given the car and given the plantation by this general. This guy this was a general, and he was a surgeon at Mass General Hospital, and he was a general in the Army. And he got transferred down to Savannah, Georgia, and went over to Statesboro, Georgia, and bought himself a plantation. Never married, went out to California during the war and came back home, and he'd taken the car and drove it down to Georgia back in the 30s and parked it in the garage because the engine was making noise. It was very common for carbon buildup in cars back then because the gasoline was so poor. So they'd taken the head off and never finished the project, in the car sitting in this garage. So when he had passed away, the gentleman that I got the car from was the son of the caretaker of the plantation, and the guy, when he died, didn't have anyone to leave it to, so he left everything to his caretaker, who therefore passed it on to his son. His son had no need for the car at all, no want for the car. So he sold it, and I was told how much it was going to be.
You lost the mic.
Sorry. Well, this cord pulls out. There. That's better. Amazing.
Thanks, everybody.
Amazing. Technology. Anyways, I thought it was so cheap that I could never do that, so I doubled the price. So we went to negotiate the price, and I made him the offer, which was double of what he was looking for the car. And he looked at me and he says, well, I was hoping for a bit more, but I think that's a pretty good number. We shook hands and I owned the car. Later on we got it running. You saw it on Chasing Classic Cars if you watched the show. And I made a decision though to sell it after my daughter and I were out for a ride in the car. And we almost got in a head-on collision where someone was talking on their cell phone and came over into our lane and ended up on the guy's front lawn. And luckily I pulled the e-brake up, got the car sideways, and she just missed us and went up, hit a mailbox and went into somebody's front lawn. I made a decision right then that it was sort of like a jinxie car for me. and I called right away the auction house. I said, let's sell this car. So, but there's always the next car. People say, how could you sell that car? You know, it was such a great find. Well, right after that, Ralph Morano was in the back there, and myself found a Minerva that's a spectacular car. So there's always something else down the road, I guess. But we certainly do miss that car. We drove it in New York City, went to a chowder event there, and driving it down Fifth Avenue. I think I obtained all the things I wanted to. I went to Pebble Beach with the car, won the HVA award. Doesn't get much better than that.
It was fun watching you come in. I think there was a little side seat on it, right? Weren't you guys taking turns kind of being on the little side seat as you came in?
Yeah, Ralph rode on the side seat when we were on a tour, hanging on for dear life. But it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think the difference between Wayne and I is he would say, is it a Volkswagen engine? And the guy says, no, it's a real one. And he says, whew, good. And I'd say, is it a Volkswagen engine? The guy would say, yeah. And I'd say, yes.
Well, you know, growing up and doing this stuff, you know, we saw a picture of my dad and myself. My father did this his entire life. We would take Sunday afternoon drives and look behind every house and every garage. That was our job as kids, you know, and if you found a car, you got an ice cream cone, you know, at the end of the day. Wow. But he had Hemmings Motor News next to his seat at the kitchen table, and Hemmings back in that day was a small little publication, and he would dog-ear all the pages and circle the ads, and then he would put them down. He wouldn't call right away, he would let them go. So he had two piles, the fresh pile and the older pile. And as they got older, he would pick up the magazine probably 6 months later. And if that guy still had that car, he knew he could buy it for a bargain.
Wow.
So, you know,
pretty good.
Little tricks like that paid off for my dad down the road, and we found all sorts of great treasures that way.
Speaking of finding treasures, Gord's got the next one here, the 71 Ferrari. That's a pretty snazzy picture of it, but your experience with it started a good bit earlier than that, didn't it?
Yeah, so this car, we got a phone call to the office, and I picked up the phone. It was an individual from Toronto, Ontario, who said that he owned this Daytona that he bought brand new. And honestly, there aren't many great cars that we get offered out of Canada, so it was interesting that this was a very local car. It wasn't somewhere in the United States. I said to him, he had troubles emailing me photos, and I said, when can I come up? And I think it was within a couple days. I went up, I met him one night after supper at his condo. He was originally from Hong Kong. He basically, when he was 26 years old, he was in Geneva skiing. Got to the airport, his flight was delayed for the day. He had nothing to do. He saw a sign that the auto show was on, so he decided to go to the auto show. Gets there, Ferrari has a display set up with 2 Daytonas and a Dino. And he walks around the the Daytona, and starts talking to the man from Ferrari at the stand. He's like, I gotta buy one of these. I gotta own one of these. And he said, you know, you can go to any dealership and order one. So he ended up changing his flight back to Toronto, flew to Modena, went to Ferrari, talked to one of the representatives there, ordered the car, his colors, special interior. It was a Euro specification car. He basically wrote a check for the deposit, flew home. They said the car will be ready in the summer. He wanted to take delivery of it in Europe. He flew back that summer, drove the car around for, I think, a month. It went back to Ferrari, had its first oil change, and then he actually went on the ship with the car to New York City, landed in New York City, and drove the car up to Toronto. And it's funny because he got to the border, and it's a Euro specification car, so it's technically not emissions compliant or whatever the issues were with a Euro car in North America. And he was able to barter with the guys at the border, and he paid a little bit of money, and they were actually able to let him import the car. So this car was well used. He had 90,000 kilometers on it. And in 1989, his father passed away. They had a big shipping company back in Hong Kong, so he had to leave very quickly. So he put the car up on blocks in his condo garage. and flew back thinking he'd be a couple months. He'd come back. A couple months turned into 6 years. When he finally came back, he had I think it was a Mercedes 280 SL and some sort of Ford, so he never touched the car again. And when he called me, I went up to see him, and we talked in his condo for a little bit, and then we went down into the parking garage. And as we walked through the garage, I could see this car under a cover up on blocks, and I was almost tripping over myself to get my phone out in order to take pictures of it under this car cover. And we walked over to the car and lifted the car cover off it, and it's exactly the way that he had left it in 1989. The 1989 sticker on the rear of the plate, and we negotiated for a while, and we were selling this car at Amelia Island. I think it was back in 2015, and we did a handshake deal that night, and I said, okay, when can I come up and pick up the car? We were going to bring it back to our facility and get the car up and running, and I went back up 2 days later. We brought air tanks. I brought a couple guys with me, put it back on its wheels, dragged it out of this parking garage. It was up on the 3rd floor. The car had no brakes, so we had to tow it to the hill, then hook onto the back, let it go down so that our car could kind of, help slow it down going down the hill. And about 3 weeks later, I had him come down to Chatham for the day, and we had the car up and running, and he got to drive it again. So we did a little video with him. He was crying when he got back in the car that after 25 years the car was running and driving, and we brought it down to Amelia Island, and it's very rare to have one that's dead original. We brought it down and we sold it for $770,000, and at the time that's what a fully restored car would have brought. So the fact that if you think of cost of restoration, this should have been a $300,000 or $400,000 car, and it brings $770,000. But it goes to show that the story and the history of a car is as important as any special feature on it. So it's one I'll always remember. And actually, when we pulled the car out of the garage, it had been sitting there so long that they would come in and pressure wash the floors 4 times a year. And the car had been sitting there so long that the parking spot numbers on the wall, there was no number in front of this car. And they had gone in at some point and painted a black border around the whole inside of the condo parking garage, and it had stopped where that car was. So it had been sitting there so long that I actually took a picture of the empty spot after we pulled the car out. But it's just a really cool story. He was 77 years old, and it was just one I'll always remember.
It's fascinating. And I think a lot of people can, when you're talking about easing a car with no brakes down a hill with a tow strap, and a lot of people in the room just went, oh yeah, we've been there. We've done that.
Hey, Brad, the interesting thing, Brad, on this one is when Gord, because even though we're all competitors, if you want to call us competitors, we still, this is our drug, what we do here. And when Gord found it, he sent me a picture, and he goes, well, I found something today, and he kind of beat me to a Ferrari, so that's kind of a little one-upmanship. But he showed me a picture of the parking spot. He goes, let me just tell you, the car was here, so.
Yeah. He was the first one I sent a picture to, yeah.
So it's all kind of fun for all of us.
Well, and that's what's fun about what all you guys do. There's a little bit of competitive spirit. There's also a lot of camaraderie in all this, because in the end, you're all diehard car enthusiasts. You're excited that something that was once lost has now been found again. And it's up to you to figure out what's your particular schematic on how that gets back out to the world. Does it stay a barn find and you drive it around like a preservation car? Is it restored? Is it sold to an owner who's going to make that decision? It's kind of fascinating. You guys all have your own approaches to this, and it's really interesting.
Bill Warner always reminds me that I stole that Stutz out of his backyard. I mean, every time he sees me. So we're all competitive, that's for sure.
We're going to move on to Mr. Cotter. What's interesting about the cars that you're seeing here, as we were talking yesterday, all the slides of all these cars, they were all found about within an hour.
Within an hour of where we are right now. Yeah.
So what's going on here? You've got a talk. That looks like a barn find. There's all kinds of stuff in there.
There's all sorts of stuff in there. There's a Buick Skylark at the far end. That's a Buick Caballero station wagon that you can see with the cover half on it. This gentleman was a retired engineer from Buick, and he lived north of the city. And, how did we find out about him? I can't tell you how much word of mouth works, but whenever I go on a barn finding trip, I get on Facebook and just say, look, I'm going up to Maine, or I'm going to Northern California, or in this case, I'm going to Detroit. Anybody have any leads? And when I left for this trip, it was a year ago right now in July, I had one lead, and it was a 67 Ford Country Squire. I don't know if you guys saw it in the video, but this is one of one, a 428 cubic inch, 4-speed, bucket seats and a console in a wagon. It's like, yeah, so that one I had to buy. I called my wife. I said, I just found a Cobra that seats 8 people. I have to. But that's the only car I knew about before we left. And so then I got here on a Friday night. On Saturday, I went to Past Diners, which is on Woodward, and there's a Cars and Coffee. And just thought, look, I'm looking for old cars. Do you know of any? And that kept us busy for 2 weeks. Unbelievable. So we found out about this guy who's got, probably 50, 60 cars. Everything from a Jabro, which is a little sports racer, kind of Crosley-powered sports car. But he was mainly into Buicks, and he had an amazing collection. And he had retired, and he says, it takes me 6 years to do a car, and so I've got about 300 years worth of cars to do. He'd like to do everything himself. He's fabulous fabricator. He said, it's time for me to start selling these cars because I figure I can do 1 or 2 more in my lifetime, and that's it. So, and then you talk to this guy and you say, okay, well, do you know anybody else around? Well, yeah, there's this guy, 3 miles from here, and one lead leads to another lead, leads to another lead, and that's how 2 weeks went. And I promise you that I could have spent a year in this area, just 1 hour outside of the center of the city, and never stopped finding stuff like this. Just amazing. So like if you live around here and you think there's no old cars, let me tell you, there's a lot of old cars.
We're going to go to the next one here. This one's for Wayne. Speedster.
Yeah, I know the Speedster. We got a lead about an AC Bristol powered roadster in Michigan, and we followed that lead, and in the garage this car was sitting there, and the gentleman used to race it, and ended up buying both cars, but sometimes it's a little difficult to get things away from people, and so from the day we were there, it actually took 6 months afterwards to actually make the purchase, which you have to be patient, you have to work with the people, and you have to stay in constant contact with them too. So the guy went to Florida. He says, well, let me think about it. I'm going to Florida. I said, how long are you going to Florida? I'm going for the winter. I'm going, oh my God, I gotta wait the winter? Yeah. But if you're patient and you want the cars bad enough, and I think that's what did it. He didn't want to sell the Speedster, but by the time he got back from his winter vacation, we were able to buy both cars. So kind of cool.
Yeah.
Kind of cool.
I've spent a couple of days in the car with Wayne recently for a great race, and it's a barrage of people emailing and calling, and Wayne deals with it, sorting these things out, trying to figure out what's real, what is not real, what is a waste of time, and it's just got to be exhausting, because with the show, everybody wants you to know what they've got.
That's why I'm sitting over here, not with those guys, because they want to beat me up constantly, because they get their leads a lot of different ways, but it's the most wonderful thing when you're in over 4 million homes at a period of time telling people about your car stories, and they call you up. I get so many leads a day and so many emails, it's wonderful, so keep them coming, please. Please keep them coming.
But the people have to realize that they'll only get on TV with you. I'll pay more.
Okay.
There it is.
I doubt it.
Game on.
Game on.
We want to leave time for Q&A at the end of the session, so I'm going to move through some of these other slides. The next one here, back to Tom. We had a debate about what this was, and you had to actually tell us. It wasn't one I was familiar with at all. So what the heck is this thing?
It's a Victress. This was found in Windsor, Ontario, and so the guy that had it lives in the States, and he called me up and said, I found this car. You got to take a look at it sometime. I said, well, I'm up in Detroit. He said, well, so am I. So it worked out really well because he lives in Florida. This is a fiberglass kit car that was never built. So I'd say, for every 10 fiberglass kit, for every 100 fiberglass kit cars that were sold in the 50s, 99 were never built, and this is one of them. This was on a TR2 or TR3 Triumph chassis, but we took a picture of it at the Packard plant. I just wanted to, and that's in the book. That was photographed and posed just for that purpose, to be in the book and have graffiti in the background, the reflection in the puddle in the front. Neat car, and he got it for $500. So yeah, they're out there.
And the only one? There's not any of those out running around?
I think he knows of 3 of them. One is semi-restored, and the other 2 are trash.
Wow.
They don't rust. They're fiberglass.
The next one we've got here for Gord, kind of an example of not exactly a high mileage car, I think, when you got a hold of this.
No, the story's a bit different. We didn't find it in a barn or anything like that. This is a car that a gentleman basically bought brand new. He was a very wealthy man, was buying up a lot of cars in the 90s. This car had 10 kilometers on it. It was still covered in its cosmoline that the cars were shipped in back when new. This is a car that had been offered around a lot, but actually could never be bought. And we were finally able to secure the car for auction. We sold it actually at one of our sales in Italy back in May, and it's one of 51 built, one of 2 in this color combination. It had lots of special things done to it. It's got a roll bar in it, but it was covered in leather. The dash was in leather. Just lots of little bits and pieces. The fire extinguishers that were inside the car, everything was very tailor-made for this specific client. And we ended up selling the car for just under $2.4 million. And it's honestly a car that they might wash it and probably park it, because the value, unfortunately in a car like this is all in the mileage. But it's bragging rights for certain people if they have the lowest mileage, most unique, whatever it may be. In this case, this Porsche RSR, but it was a cool thing to sell for sure.
There's a couple of schools of thought on cars. Use them, drive them, and then others, the value goes away if it's driven at all. I mean, what do you guys think of that?
I'm a user. Like, I want to drive anything that I ever own. I understand the philosophy a bit, but I could never be that kind of person. We sell a lot of, cars of this era, the modern Ferraris, and everybody always wants the lowest mileage one. They want to be, one up from maybe their buddy that collects cars, and it's just part of what's driving the market in the 90s and 2000 era cars. But I'm more into the old stuff, and the more miles the better.
And if you drive them 100 miles a year, I mean, you're still going to have the lowest miles one around anyway. So
right.
Just use it.
Yeah.
Sparingly, but use it.
Sure. Well, with a car like that RSR, I mean, could it be started and run? I mean, do you think, or is it all completely deteriorated internally where it probably wouldn't work?
That car, if somebody wanted to start driving it, you're probably pulling the motor out, pulling the motor apart, going through the suspension. You're spending, a few $100,000 probably to go through that car before you can ever start driving it. But it is pretty neat. It's kind of like, if you're a kid and there was a certain toy you wanted and you find one that's still in the original box.
Sure.
This is what that is in the car world.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. The next slide, we've got a Dodge from Tom. Click. On the other end of the spectrum.
This was pretty cool. To me, this looked like a Ram Chargers Dodge from the cover of a Hot Rod magazine back in the day. This was found just a few blocks from the Packard plant. Went to a Packard plant on Sunday morning, and they were actually filming a movie in there, Fast and the Furious, I think, or something like that. And so they chased us off the property, but we kept on driving in larger circles around there to see what the neighborhood might be. Came across 2 buildings and 2 yards, and it was Sunday. It was closed, and actually it was a guy's collection. He didn't even run a business out of there, but we found out through a real estate officer who owned the land and got in touch with him, and he met us there. This guy had 2 buildings full of cars. He had 2 Quonset huts and 2 open fields full of cars. He's right across the street from the largest car crusher in the world, apparently. And all day long, these cars are being dragged in. All day long, and they get $200 a car or whatever, drag them, they crush them. But if there's something interesting like this that everybody knows them, says, look, they're going to give me 200. You give me 250, you can have this car. So he has decades worth of cars that were going to be crushed. And that's one of them. It's a 383. It's got a big 4-barrel and a high-rise manifold and headers. And that's like a $5,000 car, $6,000 car. That's what he wants for it, push-button automatic. And I wanted that to be the front cover of the book, but they said because it's white, it didn't pop as much. So this is the same guy. He's got this 57 Chevy. And inside the building, he's got 53 Buick convertibles and Ford Victorias and all sorts of cars and trucks, and they're all for sale. Again, a guy that has the best intentions of saving cars. I'm going to fix them up one day, and he starts working on it, and then the other one comes in off the yard across the street, and another one. And so we met him and his granddaughter, and we spent a whole day going through their collection, and everything's for sale. So neat guy, neat cars, and this was kind of down in the hood. This wasn't Ann Arbor. This was down where it's real gritty, And we found quite a few cars down there where angels fair to tread. People told me, don't go in that neighborhood. No, I was driving the Woody. Don't go in that neighborhood without hiring an off-duty cop to go with you with a gun. And I said, okay, well, I'll keep that in mind. I got the name of a guy that would go with me for $50 an hour. I said, $50 an hour? I said, you have no idea how little we make writing books. And so, like, as opposed to these guys, I don't buy and sell cars. I just want to give you guys encouragement. There's still cars to be found. So I just like finding them, and then you guys do what you want with them. And so I drove that Woody through these neighborhoods, and it was like the icebreaker. This 39 Ford that I bought out of a barn when I was 15. I mean, we had guys that I'm sure were drug addicts and dealers and killers, and can I take a picture of your car? I mean, so we were heroes in this neighborhood. So, that's another thing. Not only talk to everybody you know about do you know anybody with cars? But if you drive an interesting car, that can be the icebreaker, something that people understand you're more serious. If you drive up a black Suburban, you're not going to get the same attention you would as if you drive up in a classic car. It really works.
We're going to do a couple more because I want to leave time for Q&A. So the next one here is the Auburn, and I know that's special to you.
So this is a car that I dreamt of as a kid, owning an Auburn Bowtail Speedster, but nothing I really wanted to go out and pursue. So I'm at a Morphe sign auction in Pennsylvania, and I'm auctioning off some of my sign collection, and I get an email, and it's from this lady, and she says, my grandfather just passed away. We need to sell his Auburn Bowtail Speedster. Might you be interested? Yeah.
I wish we got this.
And so she says, we're located in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. And I'm sitting in Morphe's auction. I'm going, I'm in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. I called her. I was 20 minutes away from her house.
Jeez.
I said, it's 2 o'clock. She says, it'll take you about 20 minutes. I said, I'll be there at 2:15. I walked in, there was a Model A Roadster, a 1909 Model T touring car, and this Auburn Bowtail Speedster. Auburn's, as Gord can really attest to, there were a lot of made-up cars in the 60s, where they took sedans and made them into speedsters. But if you really know what you're looking for, and within 15 minutes of being there, I had the seat out of the car and was crawling into the back shell of the Speedster part, the Bowtail part, looking at the wood and the structure and realizing it was a real Bowtail Speedster. The grandfather had bought the car and restored it in 1958 and had driven it over 100,000 miles to all the different events across the country, never trailered the car once. And within another 10 minutes, I owned all 3 cars. So really a cool car. It drives so well, and it's the kind of car that you get and you just don't want to touch it because it's so cool. It's got such a patina, There's great patina like finding the Stutz Bearcat, but finding an older restoration that somebody's really used, the paint's all wore off where his arm was resting out the window, that's really cool stuff.
Wow. We're going to not do the rest of the slides. We had 3 or 4 more examples everyone had put in, but we want to give you guys time to ask the questions. We did some really good deep dives on some of these cars and their strategies with the guys, but I think we have some microphones that are going to come around. And if you guys have questions for the panel, just raise your hands and we'll try and be elegant about how we get to you. I saw a hand over here. Thanks, guys.
Hi there, Jeff Feely. I'm local to the area. And my question is, so I've got a 31 Chrysler Roadster. We drove it in today. And I don't know a lot of the history. It's a mostly original car, except for the paint. Do you have any secrets that you could share with us about obtaining history for cars that old, or not even necessarily that old, but say you find a mostly original car? How do you find the history of the car?
Or did you go back with the people you bought it from and try to get as much history from them, or did you buy it from a dealer?
No, I bought it from an individual. He'd had it for about 20 years, but he didn't have a good memory, had cancer. He bought it out of an estate. He said it came from maybe Connecticut or Baltimore. That's all I've got.
Yeah. Sometimes if you put an ad in Hemmings with a picture and just say, need history of this car, you'll find a lot of guys that, that have Chryslers. They're going to follow those ads to see what other ones are selling for, see what else is available. You could, wanted information about this car, Chrysler clubs, anything like that, or the general area where you bought it from, start asking around, but that's usually some good tips.
Hi, good morning. My name is Ed Gatt. I'm wondering how many circumstances you've run into where you're looking at a car that doesn't have a title available, and how much of a deterrent is that for you in purchasing the car moving forward?
Maybe Gord can answer that better than anybody.
Depending on what it is, we have, of course, come across that situation, or we're selling, somebody wants to sell a car, they've owned it 50 years and they've lost the paperwork. There are options where we can put up a bond where it costs, 2% of what the value of the car is, and we can get a new title issued. The problem with that sometimes is you need to really make sure that they are the actual owners of the car, just that you're now getting a title in that person's name. But when it comes to examples like that, that it's whatever, they've owned it for 50 years, I mean, the chances of them not actually being the owners is, slim to none. Depending on the car, or sometimes when we get into motorcycles, we'll just offer them on a bill of sale, and then we'll offer to help the potential or the new buyer acquire a title afterwards. But bonding them is typically what ends up happening, or we put them in touch with somebody to kind of look after that. And
there's always Alabama. Although
that's getting difficult now too.
That's getting difficult. There's another one. You know about getnewtitle.com? There's a service out of Maine, and it used to be cheap, and now it's quite expensive. But maybe for $800 or something, you could send them pictures, all the information you have on the car, pictures of the serial numbers on the engine, on the chassis, whatever, and they send you a title and license plates. I mean, then it becomes a Maine licensed car. So,
what you really have to watch out for, though, is just recently there was a Porsche convertible D in our area for sale, and it was the guy that owned a garage, and he had the car for over 30 years because the gentleman brought it in to have it restored. And I asked for the title, and he just could never produce the title. He says, "I'll give you a bill of sale." I said, "Whatever." Come to find out, after doing research, the guy's wife still owned the car, and this guy's trying to sell me a car that belongs to somebody else. So you really have to be due diligence, do your investigation. Just don't buy a car in a bill of sale, because sometimes it just doesn't work out so well, and it could be 5 years from now, and suddenly the woman's son picks up the title and does some research and finds out that you own it, and he wants it back. So be very, very cautious.
It's easy to call the DMV too and run the VIN number even on a car from the 30s, and they're gonna.
DMV sometimes doesn't want to give you that information, though, so. But it's something to really pay attention to.
It just depends on the state also. The states all act differently. So in the state of California, until just recently, they only kept records for 5 years, and then they dropped out of the system. So
the state of Connecticut doesn't have titles any longer because they're too damn cheap. So you buy a car on a registration form, and that's it. That's the only way of ownership. That's the only documentation. So you got to just be cautious.
So you get a lot of leads, and I'm sure there's a lot of barn finds that are less significant than the stuff you get. And if you're not interested, do you pass that information on to someone else, a friend, or someone farther down the food chain that might be interested in that car?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yes, sure.
This may be a two-part
Absolutely.
question.
Absolutely. I mean, I've got a list of 5, 6 people that I know buy certain types of cars that I might not be interested in, but they certainly would be. So try to help both parties out.
So what about these cars that are clones, that the secret VIN doesn't line up? You familiar with the secret VIN?
Yeah.
You gotta be, you guys are doing all this stuff.
Well, old cars, there's no secret
There's no
VINs.
secret VIN, no. But a car that was made in the 60s, there's a secret VIN on it, especially you guys trying to push a Thunderbolt or something.
Something at that high level, if we don't know particularly, because I'm a specialist in certain areas, but I know who to call. I'm not going to buy something that's super sophisticated unless I have my back covered.
Same with us, guys that want to offer a car at auction. I know exactly who to call. If it's a Ferrari and I need advice, I call him, but I know who to call on Thunderbolts, I know who to call on Mopars, I know who to call just to find out that is this car exactly the way that it's being represented to me, and does it have its original motor, and was it originally a Hemi car as opposed to a 6-cylinder car. So there's guys out there, you just got to know who they are to get the right advice.
Have you guys ever found a car that's been sort of re-represented, but it's been that way for a long time, and you've had to kind of unravel some history that wasn't known by maybe the guy?
There's lots of Cobras out there like that. If a Cobra disappears from the limelight for 40 or 50 years, people feel, it must have disappeared. It must be crushed. It must be destroyed. And so somebody will build a replica of it, use that serial number, and then the original one will come up, come open again. It's like, then you got 2 cars the same number.
It's happened in the Ferrari world too, hasn't it, Tom?
All the time.
All the time.
All the time.
In fact, Bill Warner, who's sitting in the back, Bill and I, we made a trip to Cuba, several trips, and we did a book. In fact, we'll do a book signing outside those doors right afterwards. But
how much are those books?
For you?
Yeah.
So in Cuba, there are 2 going Mercedes and one 300 SL Roadster, and we saw one going and the Roadster on our trip, and it's in the book. And you can't export a car out of Cuba. Can't do it. Just can't do it. They're state treasures. Can't do it. And so everybody knew about this going, but nobody could buy it. So it just sat there. And somebody came along from Europe and just bought the pieces of the chassis that had serial numbers on them. And so now they'll take those, they put them in their suitcase, and they'll bring them back to Europe, and they'll clone a car out of these little pieces, and they'll have the real car, and the guy with the real car back in Cuba will have a pile of junk. So it's really sad. What becomes the real car? The person with the hardware or the person with the numbers?
There's a bunch of arguments we've seen too about race cars that are smashed up, right? And who owns the biggest chunk of it to recreate? That can be particularly tough to deal with. I think you've probably seen some of that in Ferrari land. There's been a lot of really public ones out there, right?
Well, I particularly own a Ferrari. There's 2 cars with the same serial number. And I own one, and it's at the factory right now trying to get it sorted out because the factory actually changed serial numbers around when the cars were new. So, I mean, it gets pretty hairy out there. A guy will own the motor, the other guy will own the chassis, and you just have to understand the content of what you're purchasing. And, sometimes it does get into the court systems to get sorted out with jurists that don't understand exactly what it is about the car.
Sure.
But I believe when it comes down to it, it's the person that owns the chassis.
Yeah. I think we're running up. We've got time for one more question, and I think we have it right here.
We all know there's like ghost cars out there. I know that there's cars that you guys are looking for, like the James Dean Porsche comes to mind. Are there any other ones that you can think of, top 3 that you hear rumors about, ones that you chase that you've, the trail goes cold and then gets warm again? Are there like a top 3 that you guys are looking for?
A friend of mine has seen the Bullet Mustang.
Okay.
It's in Ohio. Yeah.
I know there's remains of a GT40 in Ohio also.
There's a lot of cars out there, but we'll all say probably the same thing. People ask, what's your favorite car? It's the next one. I haven't owned my favorite car yet. So, you know, we love the cars that we have, and we love the cars that we chase, but boy, the next one is really the biggest treasure that we could ever find. And that should be the same with you guys. I mean, you know, you always want something that you can't have, but suddenly when it's there in front of you, you take advantage of that. So it's a lot of fun, and we're happy that we'll be able to show you guys that on our television show. Chasing Classic Cars, Wednesday night on Velocity.
That was a great closing, Wayne. Thank you very much, all of you. Brad, it was terrific. Wayne, thank you so much. Tom, I really appreciate Gord. It was great to have you here. And Tom, thank you so much, and go be a shameless commercial author. Thank you very much.
Thank you guys.
Thank you for coming.
Good being with you guys.